I hate to see them work so hard. Yeah, me too. Let's go around back where we can't see them.
If you were a kid in the 1960s or 1970s, Saturday morning television was basically a sacred ritual. You woke up early, parked yourself in front of the set, and watched whatever the networks put in front of you without question. But some of what those networks put in front of you would never survive the first pitch meeting today. Here are 10 cartoon episodes from the 60s and 70s that would be banned today. Episode 10, The Flintstones, the Winston cigarette commercials, 1960 to 1961. The Flintstones premiered on ABC on September 30th, 1960.
Got a better idea. Let's take a Winston break. That's it. Winston is the one filter cigarette.
Not as a Saturday morning children's show, but as a primetime adult comedy, airing on Friday nights at 8:30 p.m. That distinction matters because it explains what was embedded inside the original broadcast episodes that nobody talks about anymore. In the first 2 seasons of The Flintstones, the show was sponsored by Winston Cigarettes. And Winston didn't just buy advertising time that ran between episodes. They integrated their commercials directly into the program. Fred and Barney, and sometimes Wilma and Betty, appeared in animated commercial segments that were produced specifically for Winston and aired as part of the broadcast. In these segments, Fred and Barney smoked. They discussed the product, they recommended it. Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble, 2 of the most recognizable animated characters in history.
Winston packs rich tobaccos specially selected and specially processed.
Whose show ran in syndication for decades and was watched by generations of children, were functioning cigarette pitchmen embedded inside their own television program. The Winston sponsorship ended after the 2nd season in 1961, when public concern about cigarette advertising and its reach toward younger audiences began to build pressure that eventually resulted in the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act of 1970, which banned cigarette advertising on television entirely. The original broadcast episodes with the Winston segments have not been part of any standard Flintstones repackaging or streaming release. Most people who watch the Flintstones through syndication or cable reruns have no idea they ever existed. Episode 9, Johnny Quest, Pursuit of the Poho, 1964.
Stop the engine, Johnny! Hang on tight, Dr. Quest! You're in for a rough ride!
Johnny Quest was a Hanna-Barbera action-adventure series that premiered on ABC on September 18, 1964, airing on Friday nights in prime time. 26 episodes across 1 season before its production costs forced its cancellation. It then entered syndication and became one of the most heavily watched afternoon cartoons of the late 1960s and early 1970s, reaching a larger audience in reruns than it had ever found in prime time. The animation was striking, more detailed, more cinematic, and more committed to genuine tension than anything else in the Hanna-Barbera catalog. It looked different because it was different.
Welcome back, Race. And as for you 2, good work.
Drawing on the aesthetic of comic book artist Doug Wildey for its design and the Cold War thriller genre for its tone. The show followed young Johnny Quest, his scientist father, Dr. Benton Quest, their government bodyguard, Roger Race Bannon, and Johnny's friend Haji as they traveled the world confronting threats. The formula required them to visit exotic locations and encounter local populations. And in the episode Pursuit of the Poho, which aired during the show's first and only original production season, the formula revealed the limits of how the 1960s understood the world it was depicting. In that episode, Dr. Quest enters the jungle to rescue a colleague who has been kidnapped by a South American indigenous tribe called the Poho.
Here they come!
Ugala! Ugala! Tomboku! Tomboku!
Race Bannon, who serves as the group's muscle and protective authority, addresses the indigenous people in terms that no broadcast standards committee today would allow past a first draft. He refers to them as ignorant savages and heathen monkeys. Both descriptions land with the casual authority of a man who has never considered that the people he is describing might have a different perspective on the characterization. The dialogue was not meant as a characterization of Race Bannon's ignorance. It was the narrative voice of the episode, the perspective the show endorsed. The show's general approach to non-Western populations was consistent with this. Villains were frequently drawn from Asian cultures, with the recurring nemesis, Dr. Zin, designed as a yellow peril archetype in the tradition that dated back to Fu Manchu. An evil Asian mastermind with exaggerated physical features, pursuing world domination. Race Bannon's physicality and the Quest family's competence were consistently positioned against locals who were threats, obstacles, or set dressing. These elements were not accidental or unusual. They reflected a specific and widely shared set of assumptions about who the audience was, who the heroes were, and what the rest of the world existed to provide in an adventure narrative. Episode 8, Tom and Jerry, all Mammy Two Shoes episodes, 1940s to 1960s reruns. Tom and Jerry began as theatrical short films produced at MGM from 1940 onward, winning 7 Academy Awards during its original theatrical run and becoming one of the most widely broadcast animated series in television history through the 1960s and 1970s. The original theatrical shorts, produced by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera before they formed their own studio, were a different kind of production from the Saturday morning cartoons that bore their names in later decades. They were made for theatrical exhibition before feature films, at a production quality and with a creative latitude that reflected that origin. In the original run of theatrical shorts, the household where Tom lived was owned and managed by a black woman identified in some shorts as Mammy Two Shoes, a large, heavy-set woman whose legs and feet were shown in close-up, but whose face was almost never fully visible on screen. She was voiced by Lillian Randolph, an African-American actress who was a genuine radio and film performer. The character appeared in numerous shorts in the original theatrical run and remained part of the Tom and Jerry package as those shorts entered television syndication, beginning in the late 1950s and continuing through the 1960s and 1970s. Mammy Two Shoes was drawn as a minstrelsy-derived stereotype, the mammy figure, a domestic servant who was loud, superstitious, and comically exasperated by events in the household. The voice performance, while delivered by an actual black actress, was drawn in the exaggerated dialect and vocal register of the vaudeville minstrel tradition. The character appeared across numerous shorts in the original theatrical run and was routinely encountered by children watching Tom and Jerry afternoon reruns throughout the period. Cartoon Network and its companion channel Boomerang eventually banned the Mammy Two Shoes episodes entirely from broadcast, rather than continue airing them. An earlier approach had been to reanimate the sequences, redrawing Mammy as a white woman in an effort to remove the racial content, a solution that was criticized as erasure rather than acknowledgement. The original shorts featuring the character as she was originally drawn are now largely absent from commercial distribution. The issue was not subtle. These were children's cartoons in which a black domestic servant was played as a racial caricature from the minstrel tradition, which many American households watched every weekday afternoon through 2 decades of syndication without any of the surrounding context that might have allowed for critical engagement. Episode 7, Looney Tunes, Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs, 1943. This short, directed by Bob Clampett and released by Warner Brothers on January 16, 1943, is one of the 11 cartoons known informally as the Censored 11, a group of Warner Brothers theatrical shorts that United Artists pulled from syndication in 1968, specifically because their racial content was judged too offensive to continue broadcasting. Unlike cartoons from which individual offensive scenes could be cut while preserving the surrounding material, these 11 were determined to be impossible to edit. The racial content was not an element that could be removed because it was the structural foundation of the films themselves. Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs is a retelling of Snow White set in a wartime jazz context.
You guys didn't make so white think you so hot.
Well, that is a military secret.
Featuring an all-black cast of characters drawn in the exaggerated minstrel caricature style that had defined the depiction of Black Americans in entertainment since the 19th century. The characters are drawn with the specific visual vocabulary of minstrelsy: outsized lips, exaggerated features, the whole visual shorthand that had been institutionalized across a century of American popular entertainment. The jazz soundtrack and the wartime jive dialogue were intended by Clampett's own account as a celebration of Black musical culture and specifically of the hot jazz scene in Los Angeles. He worked with Black musicians and performers in the production of the short and maintained throughout his life that it was made with genuine affection for the culture it was drawing on.
And I get the blue.
The NAACP had reached out to the Warner Brothers animation unit during the short's production and requested changes that were not ultimately incorporated into the final film. The tension between Clampett's stated intentions and the visual content of the finished short has been a subject of sustained critical discussion in animation history. What is not in dispute is the visual vocabulary the short employed, which is the same vocabulary that had been used to dehumanize Black Americans for a century before the short was made. The continuing presence of Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs in animation history as one of the Censored 11, a group defined specifically by the impossibility of editing the racial content out without destroying the film,
Apples just for me.
Don't stand there blabbing, woman. Just try it and see.
makes it one of the clearest single examples of how deeply the minstrel tradition had been incorporated into the visual grammar of American animation. United Artists' 1968 decision meant these 11 cartoons would not appear on television in the United States. Warner Brothers has maintained this position through every subsequent ownership transfer. None of the Censored 11 has been included in any official home video collection, though their public domain status in some international jurisdictions has allowed them to circulate online. Episode 6, Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips, 1944. This Bugs Bunny short, directed by Friz Freleng and released on April the 22nd, 1944, is not one of the Censored 11, which makes it, in some ways, the more interesting document.
Just killing time till the island that inevitably turns up in this kind of picture inevitably turns up.
The Censored 11 were pulled wholesale because their racial content was too thoroughly embedded to be edited out. Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips was different. It occasionally surfaced in syndication packages and home video releases, despite containing some of the most aggressively stereotyped depictions of Japanese people in the Warner Brothers animation library. The short is set in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Bugs, on a raft, encounters Japanese soldiers on a Pacific island. The soldiers are depicted using the visual shorthand of wartime American propaganda. Exaggerated physical features, thick glasses, buck teeth, and the entire vocabulary of racial caricature that American popular culture deployed against Japan during the war.
What's up, Doc?
Bugs defeats them through a combination of his standard trickery and specific reliance on their depicted gullibility, stupidity, and susceptibility to American cultural goods. The short's title itself uses a racial slur in the headline position. The short was included in the 1991 Golden Age of Looney Tunes Laserdisc collection and generated significant controversy upon its home video release, more than 50 years after its original production. Cartoon Network pulled it from its June Bugs 2001 marathon, alongside 11 other Bugs Bunny shorts. The controversy that surrounded its brief home video availability demonstrated how different the experience of encountering it in a considered context was from encountering it as a child watching afternoon television in the 1960s
And don't shove, there's plenty for all. Here you are, slant eyes.
without framework or critical distance. Episode 5, Speed Racer, Violence and Death Content, 1967 to 1968. Speed Racer, known in Japan as Mach Go Go Go, was produced by Tatsunoko Production and aired in Japan beginning in April 1967. The American version, dubbed by Translux and broadcast in the United States beginning in the fall of 1967, became one of the most popular animated series in American afternoon syndication of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Children across the country knew the theme music, memorized the functions of the buttons on the Mach 5's steering wheel, and watched devotedly. What they were watching, without many of their parents fully registering it,
Can't see, let go! Take him! Thanks, it's so long!
was a cartoon in which people died regularly and graphically by the standards of what American networks were producing for children at the time. Speed Racer had a body count unlike anything in American-produced children's animation of the era. Villains and secondary characters were crushed by cars, blown up, shot, driven off cliffs, and burned in crashes with a consistency and explicitness that reflected the Japanese animation industry's significantly different relationship to violence and storytelling. The Mach 5, Speed's iconic white racing car with its memorized array of equipment buttons, was used in combat situations as well as racing ones. Characters who appeared in one episode as significant figures were often dead by the episode's end, their deaths shown rather than implied or off-screened in the way American broadcast standards required of domestically produced material.
Young man named Happy Doodle. Wait a minute, if that's the Mach 5, the young man driving it has Happy Doodle.
The American distributors dubbed the series and broadcast it largely intact, with minimal content modification for the domestic market. No American-produced children's cartoon of the late 1960s would have depicted death with this regularity or specificity. The combination of the show's enormous popularity with its graphic content created a situation in which millions of American children watched characters die on a regular basis in a cartoon during after-school hours, with essentially no regulatory response. The Federal Communications Commission's attention to children's programming content in this period was focused primarily on educational inadequacy rather than violence.
Bye-bye and thanks! Come back here! Those plans don't belong to you! Hey! Stop! Stop or I'll stop you!
A gap in regulatory coverage that shows like Speed Racer moved through without difficulty. By the content standards applied to children's animation today, which prohibit the depiction of death of human characters in most children's programming, nearly every episode of Speed Racer would require significant editing before it could be broadcast on any American network or streaming service targeting children. Episode 4, Johnny Quest, Dr. Zinn and the Yellow Peril Template, 1964 to 1965. The character of Dr. Zinn, Johnny Quest's primary recurring antagonist across the show's original 1964 to 1965 season, is worth examining on its own terms separately from the show's treatment of indigenous populations.
We haven't a second to lose, so you boys stay clear.
Yes, sir. Yes, Dr. Quest.
Dr. Zinn was an Asian villain, specifically depicted as Chinese in the show's internal logic, though the specifics of his national identity were kept vague enough to function as a general Asian threat, who pursued world domination through scientific schemes that Dr. Quest and Race Bannon had to defeat. The Yellow Peril tradition in American popular culture, the depiction of Asian people, and particularly East Asian people, as a unified, secretive, inscrutable threat to Western civilization, had been a feature of pulp fiction, film, radio, and comic books since the late 19th century. The most famous single embodiment of the tradition was Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu, a character who first appeared in 1913 and was adapted repeatedly across every medium the 20th century offered.
And welcome back, Race. And as for you two...
Dr. Zinn fit directly into this tradition, designed with exaggerated features, a sinister calm, and the specific genius villain quality that the template had always assigned to its Asian antagonists. By 1964, civil rights pressure had already produced significant changes in how American media depicted Black Americans. The same pressure had not yet reached Asian representation with comparable force. Johnny Quest offered Dr. Zinn to a generation of American children as their framework for understanding Asia, as a place from which brilliant, dangerous men emerged to threaten the world that the Quest team represented. The show was canceled after its first season due to production costs, but continued in reruns for years afterward.
Just like looking in a mirror.
Amazing, a striking resemblance.
Sustaining Dr. Zinn's cultural presence well into the 1970s. Episode 3, The All-New Super Friends Hour, Apache Chief, 1977. When Hanna-Barbera revived the Super Friends franchise in September 1977 as the all-new Super Friends Hour on ABC, the production team added new characters intended to bring multicultural representation to what had previously been an almost entirely white superhero roster. The new additions included Black Vulcan, an African-American hero with electrical powers, Samurai, a Japanese-American hero, El Dorado, a Latino hero added later in 1981, and Apache Chief, a Native American hero who could grow to enormous size by saying the Inuit word, Inukchuk. The production's stated intention was to reflect a more diverse America in its Saturday morning superhero lineup.
Good work, guys. Hey, look!
The intention behind these additions was inclusivity. The execution was a different matter. Apache Chief was written and voiced in a way that reproduced rather than challenged the stereotypes that had surrounded Native American representation in American media for decades. His speech patterns were written in the clipped, declarative style that had been a Hollywood shorthand for Native American characters since the era of sound film westerns. A style that bore no relationship to how actual Native Americans from any specific nation spoke, but had become so established in popular entertainment that writers applied it automatically to any character of that background, regardless of the nation or language being referenced. Apache itself is a term that covers multiple distinct peoples and languages.
I radioed them from the Batmobile while driving here. Better late than never.
None of which were consulted in the character's creation. The character existed to represent indigeneity as an abstract concept, a set of generic cultural signifiers assembled from the accumulated Hollywood imagery of the previous 50 years. His powers were connected to nature and to physical scale. His personality was stoic and declarative. His role in the team was to embody strength without interiority. The broader problem was structural. Native Americans had been depicted in children's cartoons throughout the 1960s and 1970s with a particular clumsiness, as either noble savages, comic figures with exaggerated speech, or historical curiosities who belonged to a past that the modern world had superseded.
Whew, that's cutting it close.
Apache Chief's placement in a contemporary superhero show was a step toward representation. The specific execution reflected a production process that had consulted a stereotype rather than a community, and produced a character whose cultural content consisted entirely of assumptions rather than knowledge. Episode 2, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Various Native American episodes, 1969 to 1970. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Premiered on CBS on September the 13th, 1969, and became one of the most successful Saturday morning programs in the history of American broadcast television. Its formula, teenagers and a talking dog investigating supernatural mysteries that always turned out to have rational explanations.
Offhand, I'd call it a door. It's a tunnel that goes back into the mountain.
Was reproduced across numerous spin-offs and continuations for decades. The show was one of the defining cultural experiences of Saturday morning television for children who grew up in the late 1960s, 1970s, and beyond. But scattered through the original 1969 to 1970 run and its early continuations are episodes in which the gang encounters Native American settings, legends, and characters in ways that consistently subordinated actual indigenous culture to the requirements of the show's formula. Native American spiritual traditions, burial grounds, ceremonies, and figures appeared regularly in Scooby-Doo episodes as the backdrop for haunting mysteries, which, in the show's world, were always revealed to be frauds perpetrated by someone with a real estate angle.
That's a small window, and you're the thinnest. Oh, boy.
The spirit of an ancient chief, the curse of a sacred burial ground, the legend of a tribal ghost. These were standard episode setups available from a cultural grab bag of mysterious indigenous things that the show treated as interchangeable with haunted mansions and phantom pirates. The specific pattern of using indigenous sacred spaces and traditions as the setting for a mystery about a criminal in a costume meant that Native American culture appeared in the show primarily as a source of spooky imagery to be debunked. The spirits and legends of actual peoples were deployed as convenient horror dressing. By the standard of how the show treated every other cultural group it encountered, Native American representation in these episodes was distinctly and consistently shallow.
I'm a miner. It's only a cigar store Indian.
The cultural material was treated as available for the show's use without a corresponding interest in or respect for the people whose traditions were being referenced. In contemporary broadcast standards and industry guidelines, the depiction of actual spiritual traditions as fraudulent backdrops for children's mystery entertainment, without context, without consultation with the communities involved, and without any acknowledgement of the living reality of those traditions, would not survive the network review process. Episode 1, Looney Tunes, Tokyo Jokyo, 1943. Tokyo Jokyo was directed by Norman McCabe and released by Warner Brothers on May 15, 1943. It is one of the most extreme examples of wartime American anti-Japanese propaganda.
Headline personalities. And I, Yamamoto, will dictate peacetime.
Produced during World War II, and one of only 2 cartoons that Warner Brothers has kept continuously out of any commercial distribution in any form, in any country, since the end of the war. The other is Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips. The short is structured as a fake instructional newsreel, an apparent Japanese propaganda film that satirizes Japanese military efficiency by depicting it as comically incompetent. Every aspect of Japanese culture and military operation that appears in the film is presented through the most aggressively stereotyped visual vocabulary available to the animation unit in 1943. The design of every Japanese character in the short borrows from the most dehumanizing tradition of American wartime caricature.
No lapels.
thick glasses, exaggerated features, the specific physical shorthand that American propaganda had established as the visual language of the enemy. The title itself was a piece of wartime wordplay that has not aged in any direction that makes it more appropriate. Unlike Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips, which at least featured the familiar character of Bugs Bunny and involved a specific story, Tokyo Jokio is almost entirely composed of the racial caricature itself. The format exists primarily as a delivery mechanism for the imagery. It has remained outside of commercial distribution since 1945, not because of any single decision made in a specific year, but because every company that has owned the library has looked at it and made the same judgment.
After eating, you were enjoying a crumb.
There is no version of this that can be contextualized for public broadcast. The Cartoon Network Toonheads documentary about World War II era cartoons discussed its existence and used brief clips specifically to illustrate what the outer edge of the era's propaganda production looked like. It is the clearest single example of American animation producing something that was not about entertainment at all. It was about hatred, made with professional craft, and aimed at children among its audience as surely as at any other. If you made it all the way to number 1, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There is a lot more where this came from.